Good evening, everyone, and welcome to IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and your premier news program for practical spiritual advice in your everyday life. Now, IKYA Live is a little different. It's a discussion around the news, not just a report. So it depends on you bringing your comments and questions to the discussion. So please actively use the chat below on YouTube Live and bring us your questions and comments. And we also have a live studio audience that will contribute. And before we get started, already down below, also please like tonight's episode and share with as many spiritual seekers, friends, and family as you can, because tonight's topic is a good, deep one for anyone on a spiritual path. And while you're doing that, be sure to like and subscribe to our social media. We are IKYA official, IKYA.official on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Now, since the new year, we've been on a bit of a path. We've been exploring everything from the shift and rapid change in technology and artificial intelligence on our human way of life, and then looking at sort of how we govern ourselves, why we're so attracted to dictators and leaving democracy behind. Why is the population actually going to be in decline rather than a population explosion being a big threat? That change has happened in just a generation. And then going even deeper into that shift, looking at our relationships with each other and how that change and shift and really focusing on ourselves and becoming a much more self-centered world has impacted demographics and led to an aging population in addition to a soon declining population. So, our tagline for IKYA Live is World News from the Spiritual Perspective, and we offer the opportunity to look at what's happening in our world around us from a bigger picture, from potentially a higher consciousness. And as spiritual seekers, we often can believe we know or understand what that actually is. But tonight we're going to poke right at that theme because it is often one of the most often misunderstood concepts in spirituality. So we are looking at how to unlock your higher consciousness tonight, and we're going to start at the beginning by asking you, IKYA, what is higher consciousness in the first place?
These are one of the topics that are both simple and difficult to talk about because, as Andy mentioned, many people think they understand it. And in modern spiritual community, everybody kind of think they kind of understand what it is, and teachers just talk about it as if people understand. And it's one of the things where you can feel really stupid if you don't get it, right? And the only stupid thing we can do, truly, is to not ask questions. And I'm the type of teacher where you can ask any question, and the dumber the better, because it means that you are honest about trying to figure things out instead of trying to look smart. When people ask me questions trying to look smart, they end up looking stupid, right? But when you ask stupid questions, you end up looking smart because then you're asking from the right place. And understanding consciousness and understanding higher consciousness and what it is and why it's important and all of that, it's at the very core of all spiritual work. And yet, it's not really talked about that much. So we'll try to kind of both debunk and make it more approachable. So to explore higher consciousness, we need to discuss two things. What is consciousness and what is high? So let's start with consciousness. And it's not one thing. We have a tendency to think of what we feel and experience in this very moment as consciousness. And then higher consciousness is a higher version of that. It's not. And right now, you are experiencing many different types of consciousness at the same time. And to me, it's a challenge or a problem that our culture is so unimaginative that we think of consciousness as one thing. I'll just name a few examples. Now, we have the biological consciousness, which we all can agree upon is real. And that is basically you not being asleep. That you are awake, then one would say that you are conscious, right? That is a biological kind of state where the brain is kind of switched on and you're not just in your subconscious. You have a subconscious consciousness and awareness as well. But the tiny, tiny, tiny part of your brain that is connected to consciousness and the I-ness, where your identity is, that is often what we think of as the biological consciousness, where you are awake. It's the least interesting one in many ways. And even that biological consciousness can be expanded because it has to do with how much awareness, right? Like how present are you? How much of your brain are you using at the same time? And we'll get back to that. But through spiritual practices, you can actually expand how your physical brain operates. And that's also a type of expansion. And then we have altered states of consciousness. It can be due to situations. It can be in a state of shock, euphoria, all these substances and different things. So your brain and the brain consciousness can go into different states. And then we have a connectedness, which is a state of consciousness where what you are in your biological consciousness are then connected to what is beyond it. And already now we're going kind of into a field where science is struggling a bit, because most scientists still would say that there is no evidence of consciousness beyond the body, right? That it can exist independently of the body. And they're right. The biological consciousness belongs to the brain. Right? So when you look at consciousness as something belonging to the brain, of course it's limited by the brain. And it's difficult to understand that we can have a self and I-ness, and then we can also have consciousness that is completely free from that. And you can't look for biological signs of that consciousness because it operates outside of it. This is through spiritual work and spiritual practices and traditions. This is what everyone is trying to figure out because we know it's there, right? Hopefully by the end of tonight, you'll understand how to get started. Flow is also a state of consciousness. It's where you find yourself in an awareness of universal energy or divine flow, whatever you want to call it, and you can sense it. Right? And it turns you into something else than just the person. Even in your body, you become aware of an energy or flow coming through. You know, what word we use, we should have different terms for this, because it's, when we talk about energy, right, it's because in spiritual work, we know what we mean by that. But in science, they say, well, energy is clearly defined. And it's not that. So my answer is, in spirituality, we operate with an expanded understanding of the term energy, that it can mean several different things. But the state of flow, where you can feel that there is an energy, a spiritual energy coming through, and sometimes even can take over, that is also a type of consciousness. And the state of expansion. Often when we meditate, when we are in different practices, it can be yoga, it can be prayer, it can be whatever, we can feel that we're starting to expand. And it's not our body, let me tell you that. It's also noticeable in the brain. When you do brain scans, you can see that the brain is starting to connect to itself. Because normally, in the normal kind of awakened state, the brain will use, between 5 and 10% of itself, maximum, based on what is firing off at any given moment, right? But when we meditate, more of that is happening. So the brain is operating more as a network. And the more experience you have with deep meditation, the more we can see through brain scans that almost all of the brain can fire off at the same time. And that creates a sensation of expansion. Most people have experienced in meditation, for instance, that they can feel, it's like a cotton wool energy type of state, where you can feel, you have this kind of wobbly sensation. You can't really tell where your body is ending and the world outside of you is beginning, and you feel like you're bigger. It becomes a physical sensation. And that is because of how the brain connects to itself. So everything feels expanded. And that's a type of consciousness. Presence is yet another category of consciousness, where it's not about flow, it's not about this or that or expansion, it's simply how much are you present in this very moment. So presence is also something that can be altered. And we'll get back to how you can play around with that. But understand that when we are in a more advanced state of consciousness, we are present to more. We're present to ourselves, in ourselves. We're present to the world, in the world. And that is also much more expanded than the normal state that the brain operates within. And then we have a different category yet again, which is transcendence. And that is the experience of going beyond the consciousness, the I-ness and the self in the body. For many, when they experience this the first time, it will be connected to both out-of-body experiences, which can also be something else. But you move into a state where you see a bigger picture. You are in a state of contextual awareness. And it's basically like you recognize that the person that you are is just like a small part. So you pull yourself out of that tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle that is you as a person. And you move into the state. It's like the finger becoming the person, right? So as a person, you operate as a finger. And then all of a sudden you move into a state where you are the whole person. And you get it. It's the most natural thing of all. And yet when you move back down into the finger, you're then just a finger. But transcendence is moving beyond, moving above. And the state of I-ness, how you experience yourself, what you are, where you are, what reality is, changes. You're no longer limited by your body, by your brain. And you are in a state that operates freely outside of the human body. The challenge with transcendence is that it cannot be measured. You can measure it based on brain activity, but you cannot measure what is beyond this reality. So science has not gotten there yet. Then we have the typical out-of-body experiences that many people have. That can happen in many different ways, but that is also a type of consciousness where you can observe yourself outside the body and you can do things and go places. And that type of experience is often you seeing yourself being in a light body, but it's still a body. It's not just floating consciousness. You can see that you are in a body, so that, for instance, might be the astral body or something like that. And often you will also be able to see that there is this string going from your head into your physical body. People all over the world, in all cultures and all times, have had experiences of this. Right? So to me, it's not possible to explain this away, that everybody's just imagining things, because why would we imagine the same thing in the same way? And why would we be able to experience things that could be verified? And then we also have other dimensional consciousness. You can have that by moving into different dimensions, but you can also have multidimensional consciousness while in this body. Because you, as soul or atma, whatever you want to call it, you're not limited to space. You're not limited to time. You're not limited to body. So you may be experiencing many kind of places and spaces at the same time. This is also part of the spiritual journey. As you develop more awareness, you will have a permanent connection to realities beyond what this physical body can experience. Remember that your physical senses and your brain operates within a very slim octave of frequencies, right? And most information available, most of existence, will be beyond the reach or the scope of your physical senses. It does not mean that it's not there. But as your consciousness in itself expands, you may experience that. And over time, that may connect and be translated to your brain. So you're starting to sense, not through your physical senses, but directly through consciousness and how your mind gets used to it. And you develop this ability to kind of translate it into what it would be as physical senses. A lot of people are experiencing this every day, and you may be one of them. So this is also part of how you're working with consciousness. So these are just like examples of some of the types of consciousness we're talking about. But when we're talking about spiritual consciousness and high consciousness, it's not the biological consciousness. It's not that you are awake in your brain, okay? It is everything but that. So the spiritual consciousness, spiritual awareness really begins where your biological consciousness ends. And this is what people all over the world, in all cultures, have been trying to access. And it can be difficult, because often the starting point will be you as a person. And how can you connect and move into a state of consciousness that is not you as the person? In the beginning, this may sound completely impossible, right? And if you can remember the first times you tried to meditate, it's all in the head, all in the emotions, all in the body, like trying to break through. And I can't see anything, I can't sense anything, where is it? And over time, because you just try, and you learn and you study, then you get a little kind of droplet here, a little thing there, and gradually start to be able to dissolve. Your sense of reality, you open up, right? And that's the key. That's how we start moving into higher consciousness. So, a higher consciousness, as it is any state that is beyond the biological consciousness. And then we can look at what the purpose of that is. Because it's certainly not for your entertainment. It might be, but when I've talked to a lot of people in my life, and when it comes to consciousness work, most people confuse a higher consciousness with an inflated ego, right? And there is nothing wrong with that, because that is simply the expansion of the self. And for the brain, that's the logical way to try to achieve higher consciousness. And the self will see that as the purpose. So then the motivation is self-importance, feeling better than others. You know, I see the full picture now, right? It's basically about feeling better about yourself. And even feel that I have control of my own life now because I can see it. Right? I can see the plan. I know what to do. Life becomes more predictable. It's a sense of power. It's not a bad power, simply that you feel that you have more power in your life and sometimes over other people because now I'm spiritual, right? For the ego, that is what you want. And it's often where we start. When we begin to approach spiritual work, we should not be discouraged by the fact that it's all ego, because it's all we know. That's where we start. We're still in survival. We're still just trying to figure out what life is and who we are and how to not die and how to avoid our own pain. So the motivation is the self. It's trying to get out of here. And that's why we're not able to. That's why we cannot connect spiritually for real. Because we want to control life. While a spiritual consciousness is the opposite, is the surrender to life unconditionally. And it's a whole different thing. So, if you are in the very kind of beginning of your conscious spiritual journey, of course you will have many ideas about how this is important to you as a person. And it makes no sense when I say it's not relevant to you as a person. It's not what it's about at all. It's not about balancing your feelings for you to have a better life. It's really not about that. And then they go, what else is there? The spiritual consciousness begins where the biological consciousness ends. So it's beyond the self. It's beyond self-interest. It's beyond the survival of the self. So why? It has to come from within. In the beginning, we will feel the ego, right, wanting to be better than others, that thing. That is simply a survival tactic. There's nothing wrong with it, but we need to understand the difference between the biological types of consciousness and the spiritual one. So whenever we want to feel better, that's hierarchical. It's smart to be better than others. This is why we want to achieve things, because then we're better than others. We want stuff. We want to achieve goals, because then we are better than others. And this is the smartest way to survive, when we have objective proof. I'm good at this. I can survive. I can win. I can be an asset to other people. So it's deeply rooted within us and in our ego that we want to be better than others. And when it comes to expansion of consciousness, that's the only motivation we have. There is a different motivation, though, that we can all connect to when we sit still and we listen. Because you are not this person. You are not your ego. You're not your survival motivation. You're not your brain. The consciousness in you, the biological consciousness, is when you take the spiritual consciousness and it's being filtered through your brain, and that's what you're left with. So it's connected to something higher, something more advanced. So when we listen inside, in meditation, just in silence, when we reflect, we begin listening to what's inside. And inside of us, there is this yearning. We can feel this pull. We can feel this calling. That there is more than this. There has to be more than this. It can be a sense of wanting to go home. So many people have this sense, this thought that I want to go home. This is not home. There is more. I am not this person. We all have these thoughts because they are true. But that also creates a sense of kind of pull, a gravitational pull towards something greater than the self. something greater than the world. And that's what you're looking for. Because that is you as a spiritual being wanting to move through evolution, to be on your journey and to unfold, which is peeling away all your misunderstandings. And in time, convert even the biological consciousness into a spiritual one. So the greatest motivation for spiritual work is that when people tell me, I don't have a choice. Something is coming from within and they can't escape it. And often they understand this because they've tried. They've tried to run away from it. They've tried everything, but there is something in them that is, in a way, overpowering. And they know they have to listen to it. They know they have to be on this journey and to connect to what is beyond the self, beyond who they are, beyond their sense of reality. And often you get very direct messages and instructions leading you closer to the journey towards higher consciousness. When that is present in you, that's a motivation that will also lead you past your ego. You will also have the other part, but that part, the spiritual part, will take over. Wait, a question?
Yes. First, before we go deeper, we need to have a practical moment. Your microphone is hitting that first button. You need to move it up between the two buttons.
Yeah, right.
And then while you're doing that, I will say that my ego has been very offended so far because it is very aware of itself and its own needs and wants, and it is very clear that this higher consciousness thing is not for the ego. But it's warming up because it's been really fascinating to hear you paint this picture of consciousness being so much more complex than really any other teacher I've ever heard describe it, but also more complex than science is able to capture, than philosophy. Like all our ways of knowing, being humans, we're really not able to kind of capture this dynamic of consciousness that you describe. And yeah, but then we got a really fun question from Germany that is perfect for this moment, because what she's asking is, can mushrooms or fungi generally serve as kind of a model or illustration of consciousness? Because even in just the past few years, we've learned so much more about the complexity of fungi that's kind of invisible to us. We only see a fraction of them. They're kind of bodies above ground or coming out of trees. But then their mycelium is this huge underground network and a whole other life that's not visible, but that's what really performs the miracles that fungi serve on the planet. So yeah, just to speak to that for a moment, if you could.
Well, all life forms represent different versions of consciousness, right? As humans, we have a tendency to believe that what we perceive as humans, how we process, how we assemble all these types of waves in our brains and then create that this is objective. All life forms have their own way of doing it, and they represent different vibration, different kind of spaces, and different ways to assemble reality. And it means also when we interact with other life forms, we get to access those spaces. For instance, when people eat mushrooms or other substances, they move into altered states of consciousness. It's not higher, it's just altered, because different life forms will assemble reality differently. So for instance, with mushrooms, it will affect your brain and you'll start to assemble information the same way they do. Same with other types of substances. They simply represent different angles. And I refer to the mixing table in the brain. Think of you having many different channels, that you have 1,000 channels, and you can do a remix. You have your standard mix that you always go to, and then through kind of different approaches, substances, techniques, this or that, you can alter the way your brain mixes the signals. And it's just like in pop music. You can have a song, and you can have a dance track, and then you can have the emo track, and you can have the, Muzak version for the elevators, and all of that. Still same song, but different ways to create the experience. These are altered states of consciousness. So substances are on the rise as tools, because now we have in our culture, I think, rediscovered them. Last time it went south very quickly in the 50s and 60s because the collective consciousness was not ready. It represented too much of everything, and humans were not ready to explore. We were more, as a culture, into defining and owning and controlling reality than using substances as a way to explore different ways to experience, and maybe also experience more. And beyond our own life form, that became a huge threat. I think we're in a different place now. So the use of substances can definitely have a place in exploring consciousness, but understand it's not a higher level of consciousness. It's the same song being mixed in a different way. And then you can discover different things. For instance, if you have a song and you make a dance track, the dance mix, you may hear the bass more clearly, or the drums. And that changes everything. They were still there in the original track, but you didn't hear them much. It's that. And it's interesting to explore different types of consciousness within ourselves. And just, for instance, when you communicate with animals, right? When you communicate with a cat or a dog, you go into a different consciousness. Cat owners, often, dog owners basically want dogs to be humans, but cat owners wants to be cats. So often cat owners, they're more used to tuning in, because otherwise cats are not interested. So you move into a different consciousness. To communicate with an animal, you need to move into their space. Same with horses or plants or whatever it is. Right? It's a way for us to explore different spaces in our consciousness. And this is also, to me, where we can start as people. Just to let our brains understand that there is more than this default setting. Because that is what makes it very difficult to break free from it, is when the brain is used to one position, right? One default setting, one approach, and then you create your definitions and your truth and your sense of reality from that one position. And then that's the objective reality, obviously, because what else could it be? So just experimenting with different positions and challenging ourselves to adjust our type of consciousness and how we experience life through it, that will make the brain question itself. So learning to vary your position of awareness, it's a very important way to create more kind of wiggle room. Ultimately, the brain will have to accept that whatever it perceives, whatever it creates as its sense of reality, it's all made up. And once the brain accepts that, we can make up a lot more interesting versions than this one. And that will happen. It's only then that the brain will be ready to be kind of rewired and reprogrammed from a higher level. Because the ultimate goal when you are in spiritual work, like not the ultimate goal, but one of the ultimate goals as a person, is to let the higher consciousness incarnate and take over. So we have to work both from transcendence, but also from here. How do we create space within ourselves to incarnate higher consciousness. And playing around with your consciousness and your assumptions about reality, that is important work.
We had a follow-up from Germany. She very much appreciated your answer, but she was expressing more wondering about a model of consciousness and the physical model of mushrooms where, you know, like basically that our biological consciousness is a very small part, like the visible mushrooms, but then you have this massive network of invisible kind of consciousness in the background or underground, that kind of thing. Is there anything to that model, to her question?
No, because it's a variation. It's not a model of consciousness, it's a model of the one type of consciousness. We exist as individuals. We exist in group consciousness. We all do all the time. And there are many different types of group consciousness as well. We have more of the mesh type of consciousness, which we'll also find in different, like mushrooms and fungi. They are communicating in different ways, but that's not unique to that life form. All life forms are connected. And we know that, for instance, trees, they communicate with each other over vast distances. They exist in networks. We also exist in networks. Humans are also used to this in tribes, in families, in groups. And we can see how we become that group that we belong to, and how we start thinking the same way, feeling the same way, and interpret information the same way. All life are connected that way and operate in many different forms, many different ways. So humans are wonderful in the way they can operate as individuals. We can be very disconnected and just be in our own space. We can also be connected to others. We can connect to other life forms. We can connect to huge groups. We can be in huge types of collective consciousness. We can be in multidimensional groups of awareness, so we can exchange and pulsate. We have this enormous flexibility in us. And to me, this is part of exploring consciousness. It's completely rewiring our whole experience of reality in the sense of who we are.
We have a question in the audience.
Well, thank you for this discussion, because it's really hard. At least I'm finding it really hard to kind of get a definition, a clear definition of consciousness, and there's so many parts of it. I was leading a workshop today with 30 people from like 15 different countries online, and we were talking about sustainability. We were talking about global warming and how we react to that. And what dawned on me was how there has been a change in consciousness over the last few years. That there are groups of people from very, very diverse corners of the world who are talking together more. There's a rising consciousness of the fact that we're all in this together. So is that just biological? Where is that between the limit of that you were talking about? And if I can throw in a second question, I remember a year or two ago you did the interviews with Donald Hoffman, which I thought were amazing to listen to. Confusing as hell, but amazing to listen to. And my understanding was that Hoffman, from a scientific viewpoint, is trying to figure out mathematical models that describe or define consciousness, and you coming from the opposite end of the spectrum and kind of meeting in the middle in terms of that. I'm just curious, is that what we're seeing in this rising level of consciousness? And if so, is it something that's even mathematical, if I can even ask that?
Yes. Now, you had several questions. I will first define consciousness. It's the active experience of presence through a body. And a body is not that. A body can be whatever. It can be, a cloud of information. But whenever you, as a spiritual being, experience yourself as operating like from or through an entity of some sort, that is consciousness. Consciousness cannot exist without body. Just like the biological consciousness is part of this body, any other type of consciousness also belongs to a body. So when you are in a collective body, you will be experiencing that consciousness within that body. And even when you experience all the universes, it's still limited to the universes. So it's through, and that something becoming a defined body, and you're experiencing through that as a lens, as a premise of a combination of natural laws. It means that you're filtering everything through that, which is the purpose. And this is also why we have so many different types of consciousness, because we exist in so many different ways at the same time. So, consciousness is not free, right? It always belongs to a body or entity of some sort. When it comes to what is happening on this planet, it is interesting, as consciousness grows individually, collectively, we see more. We get more context, part of all expansion. And especially when we're talking about spiritual consciousness and like real awareness. Remember, we start with very little awareness of anything. And we have awareness of ourselves, and then we discover our surroundings. And true expansion, I've explained this as how much you're able to include at the same time. And just bear with me, because this is simple and complex at the same time. How you perceive the world is also a description of where you are at in your own journey. So you create your own version through your awareness. Most things in the world are not relevant to you, and you don't notice and you don't care. What you notice and what you care about belongs to that space, and then you furnish that with a manifestation that you feel are important to you and represent who you are. And that has to work as an organism. This is how we practice finding balance in ourselves and interact with our own karma, is trying to make it work. So we have our own little garden, and then we try to make it work as an organism to find balance and to heal and to all of that. And when we do that, we then expand. We get a bigger garden. So when that happens, at some point, instead of just looking at a little piece of it, we expand where we can see landscapes. And part of, especially when it comes to transcendence and the attempts, meaning that to move upwards in a way. And the higher you go, the more you can see. And the wonderful thing about seeing the bigger picture is that you can see yourself in it. Often when we live our lives, we do it from a very subjective perspective. We do it from the I-ness, from the body. We're walking around in life and we're just trying to figure things out, and we bump into things and we don't really understand anything. It's just, being the avatar in the video game. Once we zoom out and we lift our consciousness, we can also see the landscape. We can see the video game. And the more we pan out, we can also start seeing the rules of the game. We can see how it's constructed. We can see what lies ahead. We can see the greater context of where things are coming from, how things are kind of woven together, and why things come at a certain time. And we start seeing what we do, not as an individual thing. We say, oh, right, I'm part of an organism. I'm always part of groups. I'm always part of networks. I'm always part of collective consciousness. So what I do may belong to several different spaces with different consciousness at the same time. So by doing what I'm doing, I'm actually influencing that space, and that space, and that space, all having different effects because they operate on different laws and different groups and different intentions. And then you start seeing your person as part of that. And then you observe yourself very differently and say, oh, right, I thought it was just me trying to figure things out. And now I can see it's actually life trying to figure itself out through me as the avatar. And I'm actually performing an experiment on behalf of life in my life, and I have no idea. I can see it happening. I can see the principle. I can see what's being played out here. And I can see my part in something greater being manifested. I can see, friends, my family karma and my family conflicts. Maybe a whole group of individuals studying something specific. And my job is to do that, and their job was to do that. And these conflicts were necessary because I can see this movement of healing. So we start seeing things in a very different way. So you start connecting to the context. And a spiritual awareness is a contextual awareness. So you as an individual become less interesting because you connect to, oh, I'm also the landscape. I'm also the other people. I'm also this group, this collective consciousness, this mesh. Because when we operate in greater bodies with others, that is who we are. We also have a sense of I-ness, which becomes a we-ness. And then when we look at the I-ness from the we-ness, we say, well, okay, maybe the we-ness here is what's important. The I-ness will just have to be disciplined and be moved around, and I can see I will have to go through this because they are doing these things over there. So we're trying to do this in harmony together, and this is my part of it. While for me as an individual, it makes no sense at all. It's only when I connect to the greater movements and the collective consciousness that I can actually see this. This is what changes when we do spiritual work for real and when we're able to lift our consciousness and explore what a true spiritual consciousness is. It changes everything simply because you get it. Not all of it, but you get more of it than you do as a person. And that becomes so much more fascinating. How things work together. And also the observation that many people have, that they can see what they're doing in their life, being part of several different movements and spaces and expressions at the same time. For a human, this can be completely mind-blowing. But it means that everything you can possibly do, every moment, every movement, every thought, every emotion, will be part of greater bodies of expressions and journeys. And you are in communication with all of them, even when you are not aware of it. Just like a cell in your body may not be aware of itself, it doesn't mean that it's not part of the body or doing exactly what it's designed to do. So when you go through life and you just do whatever, it's still part of this. And becomes more and more fascinating and more interesting. But things can only start to make sense once we move into a spiritual state of consciousness. And when you look at humans throughout history, they've all been trying to reach higher levels because inside of us we know we have to. We know we have to see the greater picture. We need to connect the dots. We know as individuals that there is something missing. In fact, most of it is missing, and it's not in my brain. So, throughout human history, in all cultures, spiritual work has been, people trying to be these great escape artists, trying to figure out how do I move past this? And whenever they do, they get, okay, this is it. And then they try to explain it and nobody gets it because you have to be there to understand. And then you see that, people are just motivated by their ego. You say, well, okay. Right? So to me, modern spirituality is great in the way that we can incorporate what it means to be human. Not trying to run away from it, but understand the journey. To share experience and trying to be smarter in how we try to inspire each other. my work is all about trying to assist people like yourself in understanding the spiritual journey, understanding spiritual work in a very concrete, practical way, so we can let go of all beliefs and dogmas, all of that, and simply experiment and explore. And working with your consciousness is absolutely foundational for any spiritual work. And the more experience you have in changing, lifting your consciousness, establishing more flexibility, and becoming used to moving into different positions, the better equipped you will be when it comes to studying spiritual principles and seeing them in your life. Because all the spiritual secrets are right in front of you, but you can't see them until you operate in a spiritual consciousness.
Yes, we have another question in the audience.
No, I've been working on exactly that principle you've been talking about. So the lower the consciousness, the more possibilities to decide. And I've been studying that principle, coming to the point when things get a little bit heated up. It's like, oh shit, how can I raise my consciousness at that point? And then when I think I have raised my consciousness, is it really raised? Or did I fool myself into a story that I wanted that to be? So maybe you can give really practical advice how I can raise my consciousness in a situation when things get heated up. And how can I see, is it really raised? Or if I fooled myself?
Yes, it's an important question. And let's go into how we can recognize higher consciousness in ourselves. And because to me, when we are sincere about spiritual work and when we achieve higher consciousness, it is noticeable also in us as people. It's not necessarily something that other people notice, but we notice it ourselves. The premise, however, is that we need to be honest. And it is important that we recognize that your level of consciousness is only relevant to you. It should mean nothing to other people. If your intention is that it should mean something to other people, you're just after the inflated ego. And that's okay, but that's not the same. So first, you have to feel comfortable with it not meaning anything to anyone but you. Okay? And that takes honesty. So that's where we start. But what we can notice in ourselves when we successfully expand our awareness, lift our consciousness, is that we don't have opinions. And we can feel it, we can sense it in our minds, because our brains will make up so many opinions, especially when we're locked to specific positions. That's when we really believe that we have understood something, because we're seeing whatever we're seeing from our usual spot. And then we can judge the world. And because we repeat it, we believe that it's true. Right? So whenever we believe that we understand something, it's because we've stayed a little bit too long in one position and repeated it. When you move around, up and down and here and there, you will not relate to your observations and your definitions the same way, because you notice that, oh, right, when I'm in that position, that's what it looked like. That's what I'm connecting with. Over there, I connect with something else. So, true expansion means that you will have less opinions. So you can just notice that you have fewer opinions. And you can notice that people have very strong opinions about things, because, well, there are many ways to look at this. You know, you get so much more relaxed And instead, you have more patience. You have more love. Because you begin to understand that, well, everyone has to go through whatever they need to go through. It's not my job to judge. And you begin to love. Because there's nothing else to do. So you can feel that your heart is opening up, and you will have more love naturally. It's not like something you have to force, but you just notice that, oh, I have more love. You will also have less noise in your mind, in your emotions. That's also because you connect to a greater image. Whenever you see more context, you get, all right, you relax more, there's less stress. Because stress is the feeling that you're not able to navigate. You don't have the necessary information, you don't know what to do. When you can see the context and connect with it, you can see it. You can see the path, you know what to do, and it works. You get less self-centered. That is natural as we expand. So there's less like, what about me stuff. The ego is insatiable when it comes to that. So once you expand, the ego relaxes. Because you don't pay so much attention to the ego anymore. It's there, but you're not too concerned about it. So the what about me thing, my needs, my feelings, that relaxes. You don't have to fight it. It's just more relaxed. So another thing that we will notice in ourselves is that we don't complain or criticize. Because we realize that everything has its place. If something exists, somebody needs it. If somebody does whatever it is, there's a reason for that. Because once you start connecting to the bigger image, you don't only see a situation, you don't only see an expression, you start seeing where it's coming from. So when somebody's doing something, you say, oh, right, okay, it's because of that. That's their journey. This is what led them here. This is the potential of the situation. My job is to love them and kind of, just be there and not judge. And it happens naturally. So this is also something we notice in ourselves. So we embrace and we support and we nurture. Because we understand that other people have to go through whatever it is they need, and it's not for us to define. So we can nurture. And also, once we get a better contextual understanding of ourselves, our own needs, we can see, oh, right, my need is not very important in this situation. Or maybe like my opinions are not called for. So we get better perspectives, and we get healthier understandings of proportion, because often our ego will make like our thoughts and feelings and needs and definitions the most important in the whole world. And they're probably not. But in our head, it's so important because we understand. Humans are not very intelligent yet. And yet we think we understand. It's that assumption from the ego that makes no sense because it's not logical. So we learn to relax all of that. And then we'll begin to connect to nature. And we feel the flow and we can see what's going on. Because the greater organism is also moving and expressing, and we can see ourselves as part of it. So you're right. That is actually what's happening. That is what is important. It's how life expresses itself. And when I think about that right now, how that applies to me is not important. My job is to surrender and be part of it. And that also becomes natural. It's a natural way of thinking. You start with nature. You do not start with yourself. And you can also sense that you have less identity, right? This is something that when you have a spiritual practice over time, your identity will start melting. The sense of I-ness, you understand that it's a construct. And you start kind of remembering that you've been in many different types of I-ness. They say, oh, right, that's just part of the costume. It's not real. And one of the reasons for this is the first kind of level of meditation, not the technique, but the state of consciousness that you go into when meditating, is that you become no one. It's a state where you don't know your own name and you're not able to think. You have no idea who you are. You're just present. It means that you're peeling off the definitions of the human and you move into the first kind of step of transcendence. So you have no definitions, you have no idea who you are. Which is because spiritually you do not have identity. Identity belongs to the specific form you identify with, because then you can say, oh, well, I'm this individual, I'm in this space, this is what I'm doing. And you need that in order to operate in a certain space and through a certain form, but it's not real. So in a higher level of consciousness, you have much less identity. And all of you, I'm sure, if you have had this experience, it's the most natural thing of all. And when you are in that state, you don't act from self-interest because the self is muted. And through that, you also get a deep respect for everything and everyone. Because you're not operating from a specific point of view anymore and fighting everyone in a different sense of reality. You get it. You include, you're open, you embrace. And you're more interested in what you haven't figured out yet than fighting for what you have figured out. Because you want to change, you want to expand, and you know that means giving up everything over and over again to gain more. And you let others be. That's part of respect. This is very strange when you are in lower consciousness. Letting others be, you think letting others be simply means not to attack them. It is this deep recognition that we're all completely unique. We're all in our own unique paths of evolution. And there's nothing to be done. Your job is your path, your evolution. Another person's job will be, their journey, their evolution. And you let them be because you understand that whatever they go through, whatever they express, whatever they manifest, no matter how they suffer, that belongs to their evolution. That belongs to their journey, and you let them be. You can nurture, you can support, you can love, but you do not try to alter the journey at all. And you don't get stuck because you understand that that concept isn't possible. Once you begin relating to this as a projection, it's a 3D projection. How can you possibly get stuck in a hologram? You can't. You can get stuck in your own way of thinking, but you recognize, all right, well, I can change that. I can just move to a different position. I can reinvent, I can change, so you will never be stuck. You will never have the feeling, you will never create the story of being stuck. So that's also one thing you'll notice. And you let life work through you. You understand that what you do as an individual is not really interesting. It's when you become fully aware, at least more aware, of the different bigger bodies that you're part of and you let that work through you, then it becomes interesting. Because when you relate to it, those bodies become part of your expression, become part of your whole experience. And the difference is, you know, if you play football and you're on the football field by yourself, kicking the ball around, it's not the same as playing with your buddies, because then you're playing football. Even more fun if you have an opposing team, and then you're really playing, and then you have a crowd watching, which is even more fun. It's that. This is what happens when you actively understand the different levels of consciousness and collective consciousness that you're part of. Because playing, being a real football player in a real match with a huge crowd in a big stadium is not the same as running around on your own with a ball. When it comes to what you are doing, it's the exact same thing. Right? In your subjective world, even with the crowds and with the opposing team, you're still running around with a ball, or not. But your understanding and your contextual experience is completely different. I think most people would prefer that one. And this is also what happens when you expand and when you begin to understand that what you do as an individual is not interesting. It's the most boring possible version of what you are doing. So the more we lift our consciousness, the more we expand, the more we get to experience this. And then everything becomes fun. And you're never doing anything on your own or by yourself. You always see potential, which is part of not getting stuck. You always understand that when things happen, it's because life has arranged for a process where the end result will be growth. It will be healing. It's the only reason anything happens, and you will look for that. You will not get kind of caught up in your stories of suffering. Why is this happening to me? You don't care. You're too busy trying to find out what life has in store next. So suffering will be gone. You will never suffer. It's the concept is impossible once you understand how life works. And to begin to see everything in your life as a dialogue with God or with life or whatever you want to call it. You see it. You see past this. And you connect with what is actually going on. You start to connect the dots. Because, oh, right, everything in my life is actually one thing. It's literature. Each manifestation is a letter, and each situation is a word. And then you have sequencing, sentences. Then you have passages, and you have pages, you have chapters, you have the whole book, which is your life, and you start to see it. And then you relate to it, and you're actively taking part in the conversation. So you can state a question, you can express it, you can see how life is responding. And what is happening on an individual level with one manifestational situation is really not interesting anymore. You know and experience too much of the context. And you have this active state of connectedness. You connect with everything and you realize this is also me. I am part of this, whatever it is. There is no such thing as me and then the world around me. It's the same thing. So whether someone is experiencing it or I'm experiencing it, it's the same thing. You see yourself as part of a greater fabric. And it gradually takes over. This is also why service, when we talk about spiritual service, why it becomes so natural. Because you are doing it to yourself. It's just the self, you understand, is much more than the individual. So you don't see the difference between you and the world around you. So it's you being you in concert with life. And of course, all you can do is love and to nurture and support, because what else is there? Because you're past the inflated ego thing. So these are just like a few of the things we can notice in ourselves when we get results, because it is not always easy to make a correct assessment based on our experiences. Because yes, we are tricking ourselves all the time, right? We make things up, we bullshit ourselves. So we need to also have a kind of longer term perspective and see, are we growing? And some of the things I've mentioned now, all of them, are signs that you are truly expanding. And I'm not too concerned about how we do it, because we're all different. We're all on different paths. We're all on different levels of evolution. But it's seeing that we gradually open up, that we gradually become a more kind of spiritual version of ourselves. That means that whatever it is we're doing, it's working. And we need to have that type of approach, because in a lower consciousness, and when we're trying to kind of break through, we have no idea if we're just making things up or if it's working. We have to look at the results. And the list of things I mentioned, these are clear signs when it's natural behavior. I've talked about this a lot, but we can all pull ourselves together and present a certain way. And then go, I'm so spiritual now because look at me doing this. It's when it becomes natural behavior, so you do it when not even being aware. Then it's real. Because in so-called spiritual work, there's a lot of fakery. There's a lot of posing, and it's part of the inflated ego thing. That's okay. It's part of exploring and learning and trying to be someone. And we should try that. But it's only when it's natural behavior. So it's just you behaving like you. And when that version is what I described, then whatever it is you're doing is working.
Okay, we actually had a very similar question from Germany about knowing when we're in higher consciousness. And I know that my own ego is obsessed with the kind of black and white clarity of, you know, almost like scientific evidence that, that I've achieved what it is I believe I'm achieving. But it's based on all of the different ways in which you've identified. It's safe to maybe summarize that it's probably not going to, we won't experience it being that clear and black and white. Is that accurate?
It's a combination of things. Remember, it's reaching a higher level of consciousness does not mean that you stay there. Being alive means that we should be able to go into any type of consciousness, any space, any type of reality, and explore. Because that is how we truly grow. So, all of these things that I mentioned are also things you will experience in a high level of consciousness. Like when you meditate, as I said, the first step is that you recognize that I don't exist. When you have that, then it's an active emptiness. It's an absence of the self. That is the first step. That means that you are then in a higher level of consciousness. When you still think, ooh, I'm in a higher consciousness, then you're not there. It's just when you register that, you're not able to think. And I know many of you have had this experience many times. But it's learning to kind of what direction to stretch and how to figure out pathways, because when we meditate over time and we are really trying to reach higher levels of consciousness, and everyone goes through this, it's about recognizing, oh, right, I activate that type of feeling, and then a little bit of that, and then I feel this kind of energy there, and then that, and then I tune in, and then I focus on light there, and like we kind of create our own recipe, which becomes a pathway, right? So we can recognize, oh, right, I'm there now. Because we can all start when we sit down, we're in our physical body, and then gradually we move into a state where we feel, all right, now I'm connected. And we recognize it. It doesn't come by just doing it once. It's doing it again and again and again and figuring out what's what. I do recommend that people take part in retreats where you can sit and meditate for days, because it enables you to go deeper and to truly explore and to get to know yourself also as an instrument. But over time, we all build these kind of steps or pathways in ourselves. And it means that after many years, you can move into deep meditation within seconds, because you've also trained your brain to kind of find the pathway, so go through the kind of sequence, but it happens like that. But that takes years of spiritual practice. And also looking at how am I tricking myself, right? Because anyone involved with spiritual work, if we are honest and truthful, we will expose ourselves to ourselves time and time again, meaning that, oh, right, I was completely wrong about this. God, it was just bullshitting. Like, what the fuck was I thinking? How could I possibly believe this, right? And that is part of it. We should celebrate every time we discover that, because it means we're closer to truth. But we should never, ever believe that stops. Because, you know, when it stops, that's a red flag for me. Because it means now we understand. Then we're just in this loop of affirming our definitions. And that's so dangerous, because that's when we start to believe that we really understand it now, and the ego is taking over completely. Then the rest is just inflation, right? The ego can only expand based on what it already knows. So once we kind of stand still in the process of discovering that we were completely wrong, then the ego will seek repetition and affirmation, and then you will become very inflated because of it. The ego will expand, and you will get these wonderful thoughts about your own importance. Because the ego has this thought, whenever we understand something, ooh, I need to tell this to everyone, right? It's so important, I've been chosen to share this message. That type of bullshit is the ego. And it's a result of you having looped in your own definitions. So when we have a healthy relationship to our ego and to expansion, from time to time, we get insight. We go like, what the fuck? How could I possibly be this stupid? And that is a sign of a healthy consciousness and a healthy mind and a healthy ego. And as like whenever we look at our past, if it doesn't make you cringe, it's a red flag, right? It should be looking at a photograph from your teens when you thought you got it all together. It's like, you know, let's never share this with anyone. It's that type of, it means that you're growing, because there's enough bullshit where it comes from, right? So we always should be in the state where we are relaxed and where we understand, like, whatever I understand, whatever definitions I'm in, they will change. And just like in science, the greatest breakthroughs means that they are demolishing old models. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the breakthroughs that will change everything, and so should we. The ego will define, will hold on to it and build identity, while spiritually, you're peeling it off. And we need both, right? So we're not killing the ego. We should rather have a healthy relationship with it and understand the purpose of it. So this is also part of, I think, when we expand in a healthy way, we become more relaxed. We don't hold on to things the same way. And we figure out how we can float, how we can surrender. And when we want to discover our own bullshit, we will. If we want affirmation that we're very advanced, that's what we will find, but it will be an expansion of the ego. So try to also look at your own kind of spiritual work and see how often do you get those insights where you look at yourself like, I was completely off. That is a sign of true expansion. And it gets exciting, right? Over time, it becomes the most exciting thing ever. Because shifting models, having insights that, oh, right, this is a better way of looking at it. And you know that at some point, that has an expiry date as well. But you will use that model because it's better. It's a better map for where you are at this moment. And then you will be happy when you get a new one. So you will not try to defend your sense of reality. You know that it's just a stepping stone.
Yes, we have a question in the audience.
So maybe I'm just playing with words here, but what's the difference between raising one's vibration and raising one's consciousness?
The two are connected. Only matter can vibrate. So it's only what is in the horizontal, which is the worlds of manifestation, because it takes kind of space for something to vibrate. So when you raise vibration, it will also raise the consciousness within that body, but it's limited to that body. Now, as spiritual consciousness, as we talked about, you operate in many different dimensions at the same time. By aligning yourself, which is a big part of also what we do in these teachings, is learning how to align. Because when we align, which is really trying to be kind of present and be in a pure state, that means you kind of hit the wormhole of your own existence. So you can be connected to other parts of yourself, other spaces, other bodies. And that is different. So it means you can kind of shift where you have your active experience, because you are present everywhere. And lifting the vibration in one body, make it compatible. Right? If you think of something in you operating here and you operate there, so when you raise your consciousness, all of a sudden there will be connection. So it's very difficult to kind of raise your consciousness as a person without raising your vibration. But you can also learn, these are like old practices that humans have figured out, that you can actually just also leave your body. You can enter the transcendent state, meaning that you don't have to raise the vibration of your body. There are infinite ways to do this. This is also why it's so important that you don't have to subscribe to one particular practice or one belief, this or that. Whatever floats your boat, whatever works. And my experience is that over time, not just in the human form, but because we incarnate everywhere, we have to go through every possible angle and practice and over time figure it out. So play around with it. But raising one's vibration is definitely something that will make one more compatible. And then how do we do that? First, if you think of you having a lot of noise and things in you pulling in different directions, right? Being very discombobulated as an individual, that will create inner turmoil and conflict. Because when you have different positions and vibrations in yourself, your body and brain is simply trying to figure out what's what, what's right, what's wrong, how should we combine this? And all your energy will be going to just doing that. So once we sort ourselves out, which means a lot of healing work, and then we have to learn what that truly is, right? But when we heal, and when we do spiritual work, and when we gain more balance, then there is peace. You have less internal conflicts, which means you also in your mind, in your brain, have the ability to place your focus. Remember, if inside of you have like 100 different voices, and they're all talking, when you place your focus, you got nothing. No one will listen. Normally, the part that talks will not listen. And when we have conflict, just like in real life, when people are in conflict, they are very preoccupied with explaining their side, right? They're attacking, they're defending, so they are expressing because they believe that they are right. And the same thing when you have conflicts in you, you have different interests, different pathways, different stories, different emotions, different definitions, and they all are trying to defend themselves. So there's no listening. The only way to make your system and your mind and your brain shut up is by creating balance. Only then can you listen. So you need to heal in order to shut the fuck up. Because you know that when you have internal conflict and you sit down to meditate, it's even worse, right? You get this sensation that you can feel that you're getting pulled in different directions, and you have all these inner discussions and feelings and this or that. And it takes a long time to get to a point where we are able to truly listen. This is why healing work is so important. This is why we need to sort out our own lives and figure out how to find balance and harmony. And then we can truly listen. And then it's easier to place focus, to be more efficient, because then we say, well, I want to focus on this now. And then all of your mind, your emotions, everything will be pointing in that direction. Then you're going to get results. So we learn over time, we need to clean the house, we need to kind of keep our house in order, which means we also learn to deal with things real time. Instead of reacting and being in shock and not dealing with things, and then we have to drag them along, and that will become noise and impurities in our system, and then we don't understand why things are not working, and then we have to go back and do healing work. It's much more efficient to learn to deal with things when they're actually happening. This is also what you get from trying to reach higher levels of consciousness and connect with context and seeing yourself as part of something greater. It's easier to see why things are happening and what your part is and how you can create balance. Because you're already playing on a team. It's easier when you're playing on a team and when you're in the middle of a match to see where the ball is, who's kicking or throwing, whatever it is, and when you should catch and what you should do and how you could pass the ball to someone else. It's difficult to do that when you think you're by yourself and you're just kicking the ball somewhere. Nothing is happening because nobody is there. So learning to expand in every possible way is important to get that sense of order, to get results in our own lives. Because we're spending so much time just trying to heal from all the injuries we give ourselves by being blind and deaf. All the problems in our life are mostly thinking that you are by yourself on a football field and you have no idea that you're in the middle of a match. And then you get injured and you don't score points and you have no idea what's going on. Life becomes so much more difficult that way. So this is, in a way, from a human point of view, this is the great benefit of raising our consciousness and then learning what is actually going on. How can I be part of this? How can I live my life from this higher perspective? Because you get very different results. It's not possible to reach true happiness as a person. You can only reach true happiness when you experience yourself as part of something greater. That's when it happens. It's the only way to achieve harmony. It's the only way to achieve true balance. You have to relate to the actual world, to the actual context in which you exist.
All right, we've got another question in the audience.
I heard you say we need to start by being true to ourselves. And still, I'm not really sure when is it true and when is biology taking over and what is truth.
Right. My point is that you can't know. Because to know means that you already have the experience and the ability to understand. You only get that level of experience by exploring it. And we cannot explore if we are afraid of doing it wrong, because we will. Exploration means that most of it is just bullshit. But you also start noticing when something is real. It cannot be explained. But just like when trying to explain to someone who's never meditated before, activate your heart. They have no idea. They've not developed the brain functions. Over time, they will develop brain functions that can actively feel and sense what's going on in the spiritual heart. And then you can actively open up your heart, just like you can lift your arm. And you get there by trying, right? I often say that spiritual work takes equal parts of dedication and desperation. And that desperation means that you just want to figure it out and you just like try whatever, and sometimes something works. It's how it is for everyone. It is impossible to explain a state of consciousness, but I can explain, as I did, what will happen to us as a person. The rest is just trying to figure out how to go higher and higher. And we can all do that, because even when we really suck at, meditation, it will still be better than not doing it. And over time, we will suck less, and we will start noticing different forms of expansion happening, because if we meditate for long enough, it's impossible that the brain will not be affected. Things will happen. We'll start feeling connectedness and energy, and we'll start seeing things, and it's inevitable, right? And then we'll just collect what works, and we, in our brains, will start making a map. And that's a wonderful thing. The mind and the brain is kind of self-learning. Whenever something is working based on the intention and goal, it will collect and try to make a map. This is why we find pathways, why the brain will create switches. When you have repeated opening your heart in a way that you reckon, oh, now my heart is open, and you do that again and again and again, over time the brain will just create a switch, because it knows what's going on. It knows what you have done. And then by activating the focus, you will do it. That's how it works. But when it comes to transcendence, that state of consciousness where you are completely free of the body, let's put it this way, if you're wondering if it's happening, it's not happening. It's a state where there's absolutely no way it is not happening. So if you wonder, am I there yet? You're not. And transcendence is just a starting point. There are many different levels of consciousness. It's not being in high consciousness and that's it. It's just a starting point. It's where you are kind of free from the individual, free from your lifetime, and where you can access more of your own greater plan, your own greater evolution, and then begin to inject that into your life. But whatever you do is better than nothing. But if we are to look a little bit like how to do and where to start, the most important thing of spiritual work is connectedness, because connectedness is something that you can recognize even as a person. You know, when you feel, for instance, when you're with friends or with someone you love, that's connectedness. We can feel, oh, right, we're vibing now. Yes, that is connectedness. And then explain, what is that? Right? You can feel connectedness with animals, with nature, with people, but it's a state that you can recognize as a person, because even the biological life form operates in collective bodies as well. So connectedness is something that all levels of life can recognize. So practicing that and recognizing and training yourself to actively switch it on and to see what is happening to me in my state and how it feels and who I become in connectedness, and then practice that. Because that is an expansion of consciousness beyond the self that your brain and your body, and even if you think that I'm too physical for this, even you can relate to it because you have experienced it. It's normally the first thing you experience once you incarnate. You know, if you're being breastfed by your mother, that is a very strong connectedness. So it's the starting point of an incarnation. It's being in a state of connectedness to your parents. You're completely open. So it starts there. And your brain, from that very first moment, will create an imprint of how to do that. But there are many different ways to explore connectedness, but you can also do it with plants. When you truly move into that state where we are the same, we are one. Like it's us. You go from the I-ness to the we-ness. Right? So any type of we-ness is a connectedness. So try to explore that. So that is a very important kind of way to start if you feel you're starting from scratch. Beyond that, a solid practice of meditation. If you're seeking higher consciousness, meditation is a must. And especially today, because there is so much noise, our civilization is too complex for our genetics. So most people are in a constant state of stress, confusion, of suffering, all of that. And meditation can assist us in calming down, connecting, and you'll figure it out. But you must seek it. You can use your imagination. You can visualize, perceptualize that you are leaving your body, that you're trying to lift yourself, that you're heightening your vibration, moving into light, becoming lighter, activating your heart. Do all of these things. There are many ways to do it. There are guided meditation apps. There's so many ways to explore it, but you need to aim for it and imagine, what is it? right? When you imagine what is it like to be in a higher state of consciousness, and really try to imagine it and try to feel it, try to be it in meditation. You can't just think it, because that doesn't help. This is what is so powerful with meditation, because when you sit down, in your brain, all your senses will begin melting together. Your brain will start to connect to itself. The bridge between the conscious part of the brain and the subconscious will be opened. So when you then focus and when you really try, you have access to most of your resources. And often we need to sit for a while just to get the noise out of our system. So for many people today, they need to sit for 15 to 20 minutes simply to release the noise. Right? So we need to get to that point where we're calm and focused. And when we can aim and then use your imagination, do everything you can just to fantasize. What is it? Try to experience it. Try to feel it, sense it, make it real. Visualize light, all of these things, and gradually you will get the hang of it. And you will be able to lift yourself a little bit, a little more, and a little bit more, and then you'll see that you're affected by it. Then you will have insights and realizations that you didn't have before. And it's that. But it takes repetition and work and going beyond the self. So next to meditation, it's reflection in general. It's letting your mind trying to debunk this. Right? Your sense of reality is what your brain has been trained to do. It's just a very, very small fraction of what's actually present. So reflecting, trying to figure out what life is truly about, what you're truly about, how you can heal yourself, how you can be more of a loving presence to the world, and then try to practice. Always kind of being in that dialogue with yourself and with the world. This is also how you lift your consciousness. So using your imagination, always try to imagine what is beyond this. If this is a projection and you're sensing just a small part of it, what is beyond it? When we know that all dimensions exist in the same reality, it means that everything is here. You exist in oneness. But you filter out almost all of it and you're left with this. What happens if you filter out less? Right? Use your imagination. But try to feel what you imagine. And then working with contextuality and trying to see the bigger picture, actively you can do this intellectually. You can try to zoom out, you can try to see things from the outside, try to see yourself from the outside, try to see what is really going on. At least try to see more of what's going on. Try to see the landscapes, try to see the textures, the fabric of life. Right? And try to see where things are coming from and where they're going and how things are interwoven. And you're a part of it. Experiment with it. It's not even important that you see it correctly. It's that you're practicing and trying. Right? When you try, you will kind of flex those muscles, and over time, there will be less fantasy and more observation. But this is how you get there. And then it's also practicing presence. This is also something we can do as people. What does it mean to be present? Right? Normally when we are somewhere, we're everywhere else at the same time. Not because we're so advanced, but because we're so full of noise. It's like the old saying that, people think about sex all the time, except when they have sex and they think of the grocery list, right? We're never present to where we are. And it's that, but today it's a lot worse. We think of everything else and we are so scattered. presence is trying to kind of de-scatter ourselves, to kind of reassemble ourselves and to be present to where we are. And to explore what does that mean? Because if I'm going to be present to this, where am I? What happens if I try to be even more present? Will this change? Will I change? So it's trying to focus on that centeredness and that grounding and explore it. And when you're with people, try to be present to them and to yourself in that moment, in that exchange. These are all things we can do as people, right? It's not lofty, it's not something else and somewhere else, because then it becomes religion. It's so important that we learn that we can start working from here. It has to be practical. So these are just a few things you can do. Any form of spiritual practice is good. Prayer can also be wonderful. To me, prayer is the art of listening and to be in dialogue. It's not giving God orders, right? The universe is not a fucking restaurant. You know, it's not a menu. It's just listen. Try to be in a loving dialogue where you understand that everything is operating on a higher order. And that the dialogue should always be about you trying to understand. You're trying to receive. You're trying to be humble. So you may be part of the greater picture instead of being in the way of it. So prayer can also be very powerful when it comes to being more present. So whatever practice you have, it's the result that matters. It's learning to also establish the intention of higher consciousness. Because ultimately, when we expand spiritually, it becomes less about us as individuals and more how we as individuals can be part of greater bodies, how we can live kind of from that and through that and let life work through us. Because everything becomes so much more interesting. It's back to what I said about football, right? Kicking the ball by yourself or being in a game. So it's that.
Yes, we have a last question on YouTube. And this one is specifically about consciousness in artificial or robotic mechanisms, whether they're, it's possible for that. But I think really the broader question is why, I'm going to make it broader, why are we humans so hesitant to recognize consciousness in anything other than other humans?
I think that's quite natural. We're doing such a terrible job at it that even the thought that other beings can be conscious will make us really scared. Right? And it's back to the noise thing. When we go back in human history, and when humans were simpler, they assumed that everything had consciousness. When you look at earlier religions and belief systems that humans had, they all thought that everything was alive. It's only recently that we have kind of skipped that. And the reason is, of course, if we want to utilize everything, control everything, we have to remove the idea that they are aware. Otherwise, we cannot control them or use them, for our own pleasure. Then we have to relate to them as intelligent beings. Humans are now culturally at the very beginning of recognizing consciousness. And also from a physics perspective, as we talked about, it's starting to move into a connectedness between spirituality and science, especially physics. Recognizing that, yeah, it's the same thing. It's just us beings trying to figure out how the universe works. And all true spirituality is, in many ways, based on physics, or it will be part of it, because you start recognizing, oh, there are mechanisms. They are observable. They can be tested. Right? So the bridge between science and spirituality is definitely growing. And also, humans are finally starting to realize that humans, that not only humans, but animals are aware. We're just in the very beginning. That plants are aware. There have been almost a revolution when it comes to how humans, you know, it's a small part. It's still scientists, right? So it's just a very small part. Experiment with animals and plants and trying to figure out, are they in fact aware? And they see that, well, fish are aware. They have families. They have memories. They have ways to recognize individuals they love, and they, you know, it's, humans have to change, and that is the scary part, right? And this century, the next century, will be so challenging for humans, having to start relating to reality. And part of it is recognizing that life is alive, that every level of life carries consciousness, and that consciousness is connected to bigger consciousness. So we're just in the very beginning. And of course, as a consciousness is simply the ability to project oneself, a part of oneself, into a body of some sort and experience through it. Of course, when it comes to synthetic life forms and robots and all of that, at some point, sure. Everything contains consciousness, otherwise it would not exist. It's just in different ways. So humans will definitely struggle with this because they hardly recognize their own awareness. They're treating it terribly. Remember, humans today, they don't want to be conscious at all. It's too painful because of the noise and because of the stress. Humans are doing everything they can to be less aware. This is where we are culturally. So you have some weirdos like yourself trying to raise your consciousness, but most people are actually trying to lower their consciousness because they don't know what to do with it. It's just painful. Culturally, this is something we all need to be aware of, which means that when you are in the process of awakening, you have more responsibility. Because for most humans, life is so painful, they don't want to be aware. The little awareness they have, they try to self-medicate to death. They just don't want to deal with things. And what we can see when we move into lower consciousness, we have more opinions. We get more aggressive. We believe our own bullshit. We don't want to change. We don't learn. We don't want to learn. We just want affirmation. We have less empathy. We care less about anything beyond ourselves and our own needs. We become more tribal, become more binary, which is also the polarization that we see in the world today. It's all of these signs, and again, self-medication. And most humans today, they have several self-medication strategies going on at the same time, trying to kill their own awareness. Because we have not a culture where people learn how to deal with consciousness. And when we are lifting the consciousness on the planet, it means we are lifting the potential. Right? We do not go in and lift people's consciousness. We kind of lift. So there's more than an octave. Now it's an octave and a half, right? And people have to grow into it, which means that they will be more confronted with everything. When we are in an individual consciousness and in the survival state, it will be more painful. It will be more difficult. And then we just want to shut down and to self-medicate and just pretend everything is okay while we're also trying to kill our neighbor at the same time. So this is where we are, but humans will move past it. But for you, in the process of awakening, you need to learn to deal with yourself and to lift your consciousness for real, because that is how you can be of service. It is when you have kind of cleaned your own mess, cleaned your own house, cleaned the self in a state of alignment, so you can allow the higher consciousness to move through you. Only then can you behave from a divine motivation. Because the divine motivation does not come from you as a person. Well, I want to serve because I'm so insightful. Let's do it this way. It's often in service we have no idea what we're doing, because it's not our business. Our business is to be in alignment. It's to be in a state of surrender. Understand that whatever I'm doing for whomever is receiving, it's none of my business. And we can also learn to have an active understanding and experience when life is taking over. It's not like being obsessed. It's kind of the opposite, but we can see that we almost become passengers and life takes over, because the greater bodies, the collective consciousness of what we are connected to, can take over. So we move into the we-ness. And then we understand that we are doing what we are doing to serve. The planet definitely needs more workers, spiritual workers. We need more beings who can operate in higher consciousness. We don't need more inflated egos. All right, so having the discipline and dedication as a person, it's what you can do from this end. And over time, you will be able to kind of penetrate and move past the human state and move into the more transcendent states, and from there channel back into your person and your life. And then what you do will be in harmony. It will be part of the greater expressions and the greater plans that life has. But you will be doing your part. And you recognize it by not having an ego motivation at all. I often refer to spiritual service as being a gardener in the woods, because it's not about anyone noticing. In fact, you're trying to make a point out of nobody noticing. Because if you want to facilitate, it's not about you. It's about enabling everyone you touch to grow more than they would have without your presence. But always making sure that they experience it as being them. The purpose of higher consciousness, therefore, is not for you to feel that you're in a higher consciousness. It's evolution. It's where we simply move past the self-importance. And self-importance can be part of the spiritual journey for a very long time. And then we get it. We're not interesting. The self is just a little dot. We have to become everything. We have to let that take over, and we understand that has its own plan. It has its own consciousness that can then also take over for that consciousness in that little dot. And then we just let it happen. So surrender, true surrender, is a huge part of moving into higher consciousness. It's not knowing all the mysteries. It's not having the right information. That is still part of the inflated ego. It's understanding over time how to move into absolute alignment. So you as an instrument is completely tuned to the universe. And then the universe will resonate through you. It cannot happen because you want to or because you want to control it. It happens as the result of you having tuned your instrument completely. So learning to tune, learning to do the work also from here as people is important, right? I always emphasize in this work that we incarnate into this world for a reason. And that reason is not, first of all, to just try to escape it and move away from it. It's opening this up. When we heal ourselves, when we balance ourselves, when we also grow as individuals, as beings, as people, that's the proof of the pudding. Right? All that inner work, if it's real, it will also show in this world. And if we're just faking it, that will also show in this world. We need this. And as you pull away the illusions of the self in this world, the veils of this world will also be pulled aside. And what you think is this world will no longer be this world. It will be more, it will be something else. And as you peel away more and more and allow for higher consciousness to incarnate, you will also let the higher version of the universe incarnate. So gradually, as you move into higher consciousness, so does the space in the world that you live in, because it's the same. The only way is through practices, it's through disciplines, through dedication, it's through desperation, it's through service, it's through love. It's trying to transform yourself as a human being. It takes time. And often what I tell people that when your intention is true, the work will be so intense you have no energy left for your ego. You'll be too exhausted to say, like, I don't care about, like, peeling away the illusions and going through what we need to go through in order to vibrate and to be in higher consciousness. Is a process of purification. If you understand that you already exist in the heart of God or in the heart of oneness, it is your own impurities that make you not experience it. So higher consciousness is available to you. In fact, you're bathing in it, but you can't hear it, you can't experience it because of your own stuff. So what we do in our karmic work is to peel away, and finding balance, tuning ourselves, piece by piece. And gradually, as we're able to let go of one illusion, we will vibrate slightly differently. Our consciousness will change. So reaching a higher consciousness for real is a process of evolution. It's not just you taking a class and being very spiritual. It changes nothing. You need to transform everything you are in all universes, all levels, for real. When you purify, you heal, you balance. It's very simple. But it takes everything. Because you need to let go of everything. You need to transform everything. You need to purify everything. So a higher level of consciousness is a process. It's a journey. It's an intention. But for you to set that goal and that intention and then doing whatever and explore and experiment and try different things and also share with others how they do it, their experience, to also peel away the misunderstandings and the bullshit, gradually you will get the taste of it. Gradually, you'll recognize more and more. And you will be more efficient in how you purify and how you lift yourself. But ultimately, enlightenment is inevitable. It is your destiny. It is your birthright. And ultimately, you're already there. You just don't know it yet.
Thank you so much, IKYA. A clarion call for action, to be sure. And thank you all for joining us for IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and again, your premier news program for practical spiritual advice in your everyday life. And tonight is a beautiful example. So again, please share tonight's episode widely with any spiritual seekers in your life. Also friends, family, struggling, looking for their path, looking for answers, because tonight was really all the instructions any of us need to move forward on our path. So we are back here 19 o'clock on this next Monday for IKYA Live, and we look forward to seeing you either here at IKYA Center in Oslo, Norway, or here on YouTube Live. Until then, be well.